Today, we're going to start talking about the actual, the units that were involved in the killing in Russia, and actually a little bit about their, excuse me? Yeah, so we're actually not going to talk about them specifically. We're going to talk about other units that were involved, which are the police battalions, because Goldhagen believes that these units are very important for building a framework for why the Germans did what they did, and how he goes through all the explanations or excuses for how the Germans were coerced or things of that nature, and he tries to disprove them by using the order police. So what are the order police? So the order police, so they were, obviously they were police units, and Goldhagen believes there are three crucial features of these units. The first one is that a large percentage of their members were not selected for military or ideological fitness. Okay, so these are people who are either physically unfit to go into the army, or they're too old, and in terms of ideological fitness, they weren't selected for being Nazis. Evil Nazis? They weren't selected for being Nazis. Let's try and keep it as impartial as possible for now. They were really selected haphazardly. It was really anybody that they could get. Okay? And there was no ideological screening either. It wasn't that if they found out something about you, you couldn't get in. They really just took anybody they could get, because the army had first pick, and then other units had first pick. So these guys are really the bottom of the barrel in terms of personnel. The training they received was also subpar. We'll talk about it a little more soon, but it's important to realize that they got below par training in weapons, logistics, and most importantly, ideologically, they were not indoctrinated in any sort of way that you could say that they conclusively were completely brainwashed. Okay? And the third part is that they were not any more Nazified than Germany itself. So they're somewhat representative of what you can say the ordinary German population would be. In terms of numbers, at the start of the war, they started off at around 130,000 people, and they peaked in 1943 at 310,000. Okay, so they kept taking more and more people because, again, they needed more people for all the things they were doing. Excuse me? So we'll get to that in a second. So battalions averaged around 500 men, and what they did was they did things like policing, traffic flow, so in terms of taking care. They were like military police in the American Army in terms of directing military traffic.
They have to say over other?
No. So we'll talk about where they were. I can say that now. They were under the HSSPF, which was an organization that regionally, each region had its own division that controlled the SS, the security police, and the order police. Okay, so they were part of a larger security structure. So it's not that they didn't really have any control. They were more auxiliary, right? They helped the army get around. They guarded places like supply depots and munitions depots.
They got blown up when they were running, when opposing people were running spy and rogue missions.
Things of that nature, yeah. They also fought partisans, so they were really behind the lines, right? You don't want first-line soldiers having to fight partisans, right? So they got these guys to do it. And they also were involved in transferring populations, which
with Jews.
Yeah, centers around. There were other population transfers, but centrally around deporting Jews and actively killing Jews. Okay, and we'll talk about both parts of what they did today.
And the guy you were saying uses this to defend that the Nazis weren't evil?
No, so Goldhagen's premise is that by going through what these guys did, you can see that the Germans weren't coerced. They did it willingly. Correct. So he's saying there are standard arguments to say that individual Germans are not responsible for the Holocaust. So his primary book, right, the name is Hitler's Willing Executioners, primary point of the book is that the people that were involved in killing did so willingly and actively. and he comes up with the reason for why eliminationist anti-Semitism is different than anything else. We've tried to focus on that more at the beginning. Now we're just talking about the actual commission of the crimes. So we said that the training was perfunctory. How long do you think that the training was?
A week?
Okay, longer than that.
A month?
It was 3 months. If they got the entire training, that wasn't always possible if they needed them faster. Okay? And to show that this was actually inadequate, an inspector's conclusion was that after 6 months of training, the reservists of Police Reserve Battalion 65 and 67 were still not sufficiently trained. Okay, and members of the Order Police, when interviewed, also corroborated this, that they were not, the training they received was not sufficient. Okay, so again, to stress the point, these are not elite institutions. Also, since these men are older, they're also more likely not to be, they're likely to be more independent than what was the norm in Germany at the time. Okay? And, again, not a Nazi institution. Officers were not chosen for being Nazis, and the rank and file even less so. Okay? So, we talked about that they're under the HSSPF. We don't really know everything about what they did. A lot of things are lost. The reasons for this are that the actual orders to kill were given either over the telephone or in person, face to face. So those orders aren't actually recorded. But this also let the police have some autonomy in carrying out their actual crimes. They had some choice about what they would do and some independence. Another point is that it's important to remember that these men had a lot of downtime, and they actually lived, aside from carrying out these murders, they actually lived relatively normal lives. They went to church, they went out drinking, they played sports. So they actually had a lot of downtime, and they had a lot of time to talk about it. They had a lot of time to ruminate over what they were doing. So it wasn't like they were oppressed, it wasn't like they were isolated. They actually were still integrated in the communities where they were, and they had time to actually think about what they were doing. So participation of these units in killing began directly after the invasion of the Soviet Union. For example, Battalion 9 filled out parts of 3 out of the 4 Einsatzgruppen. Okay, so not all of the Einsatzgruppen were SS, some of them were police members as well. 3 battalions of Police Regiment 10 and 11 operated in the Ukraine, and Police Battalions 307, 316, and 322 operated in Belarusia. So you can tell just from those examples that a whole wide array of policemen were involved in killing in all different places. So one example, there are going to be several that I'm going to talk about today, is Police Battalion 309. They entered Bialystok on June 27th. So Bialystok surrendered without a fight, and this battalion was ordered to round up all male Jews. And even though the obvious point of rounding them up was to kill them, the actual orders to kill were not given at that point in time. Okay? But this is a quote from a Jew who was there at the time, and said that the unit had barely got to the city when soldiers swarmed out without any sensible cause, shot up the entire city. The incessant shooting was horrible. They shot blindly into houses and windows without regard for whether they hit anyone. The shooting lasted the entire day. Okay, so even though they hadn't yet been ordered to kill, they were doing it on their own, right?
Yeah. How do you know that they weren't ordered to kill? You just said that they were ordered by phone or by person.
So in terms of being ordered, this unit, in terms of this specific thing, they know the order was only to round them up. I assume because they talked to people from the unit. A lot of the testimonies, a lot of the reason why they have information from this is from testimonies from people. Not all of it. Some of it, we're going to talk about later, they had weekly tallies of how many people they killed. So those are actual physical records. But a lot of the time, the information they have from here is by eyewitness testimony. Okay? So, a lot of the brutalities that they engaged in were completely unnecessary. For example, there's a story that a Jew was caught peeking out of his house, and a lieutenant saw that he was peeking out, and he shot him in the face. Okay? So again, the orders were only to round him up. So it's hard to argue. Well, that's a good question. It's hard to argue that he was coerced into shooting this man if his orders were only to round him up. Even if he was going to shoot him after, right? The whole point is that if, let's say that even they were coerced to kill. There were times where they clearly weren't, and yet they did it anyway. So at this point in time, if you recall, they weren't killing them yet.
Like they were shooting the houses randomly.
Right. So they inevitably were killing women and children. That's part of the point. The point is that they went far above their orders. And it wasn't just they were killing because they were told to. Again, that is the major thrust of this argument.
Random question. What does SS stand for?
Schutzstaffel. It means security force. HSSPF stands for something really long in German. I just decided to leave it out. German words tend to be sentences. So basically, an entire word is a sentence, right? Their acronyms aren't for separate words. Basically, different parts of a sentence that they put together into one big word. But I don't know that much German. But anyway. What?
Spiegel, you know what that means?
Mirror.
Yes, you know why. Rashi brings that down.
Okay.
You're out there.
Thank you. Okay. Oh, there are a lot of you. What? Well, usually it starts off big and then gets smaller and smaller by attrition. No, more like, if the roast turns around, and then it's on camera. If the roast realizes that you're all gone, then he goes and gets it. But if he doesn't, then you all get to stay.
You're big. His camera there.
What? I know. But they're not quiet anyway. Again, further examples. Germans. In Bialystok, they forced elderly Jews to dance. And if they would not dance fast enough, they lit their beards on fire. So, another thing that they did in Bialystok is that they took elderly Jews. No. Well, eventually. But first they made them dance, and if they didn't dance fast enough, they lit their beards on fire.
They're saying it's simple?
How fast? Herman, how many staff? Can you shut the hell up?
I'm not completely sure.
One of those classic
What, from Platoon?
No, from Back in the Future.
Herman, shut the hell up.
There's a scene in Platoon where he shoots. Anyway, there's another instance where two Jews on their knees pleading for their lives before a German general. A member of the police battalion came over to them and urinated on them. in front of a general, which is, let's see, yeah, all right, which is very important because that is an immense breach of military discipline. You do not usually think that exposing yourself before a general is really part of military decorum. Yet the general didn't do anything to him, right? Okay, so the operations against the Jews were outside of any sort of military framework from the standpoint is that they didn't have to conform to any sort of rules and regulations anymore. Also, they went through a hospital looking for Jews, only taking the Jews and leaving actual Soviet soldiers, which really diffuses the argument of killing active people that could come back to be partisans, because you would think that letting soldiers recover would be worse than letting sick Jews recover. So, the killing was to take place in the marketplace, but it was going too slow. So, what they did was, on their own initiative, they took all the Jews that they could find, and they brought them to the shul, which happens to have been the largest shul in Poland. Okay, and they took them in and they set the shul on fire. And here's a quote from a member of the police battalion. What he said was, "I saw smoke that came out of the synagogue and heard the people inside crying for help. You could see people trying to escape through the windows. One shot at them. Circling the synagogue were police members to ensure that no one emerged." Okay? And what are the recorded emotions from people that were around there from the police units? The one quote that he has there is, "Let it burn, it's a nice little fire and it's great fun." Okay? So, again, really stressing, doesn't really sound like you're being coerced into it if that's really your reaction. And again, to further dispel that argument, there is eyewitness testimony to the fact that even from this time early on, all members of the killing units were composed primarily of volunteers. What? Okay, so all the members were composed of volunteers. So nobody was forced into doing it. Again, one of the members said, "I can still remember with certainty that our sergeant said 2 or 3 times to assemble our squads. I would like to say that this sort of squad was composed only of volunteers." Okay? We're going to talk more next week also. So, battalion is 500. There were four companies that they were split into, sometimes 3. They were split into platoons and then groups of 10 to 15. So I assume a squad would be around 10 to 15. 10 to 15. No, it's not so many, but all of them, right? Every squad of every company. It wasn't like they got the same 10 to 15 guys to do it every time, right? Another example, Germans employed Russian prisoners of war to be what they called houseboys, which was to be, to do menial tasks for them.
Example?
I'm about to give you one.
Right, we have to be quiet or something.
Alright.
If they got them to do menial tasks, like in the kitchen, take care of their stuff, things of that nature. What they would do was, if they found out that the houseboy was Jewish, they would kill him. Okay? 2 examples. One killer recounts how he took an individual Jew into the forest. Now, if he wanted to, he could have let him go. Nobody would know that he didn't shoot him, right? Right?
Yeah.
But he shot him anyway.
Then why would nobody know?
How do you know that though?
Where would he go?
Because he's telling the
He's
story.
giving the testimony.
Yeah, he's giving the story that he shot him. Maybe he really did let the guy go.
Think of the logic. Why, if you're testifying, usually these guys are testifying at trials that they're going to have. Right?
Yeah.
So, do you really want to testify that you killed somebody?
No.
I would think that people trying to lie would say that they didn't kill.
That'd be a smarter way of doing it.
I think you have to say that when somebody testifies the fact that they killed somebody. Okay? All right. Excellent. Okay? Also, in a similar vein, they didn't have to discover that their boys were Jewish, right? They could just say they didn't know. Again, these are things that these members did out of their own volition. Nobody forced them to go searching for these guys. Okay. Not only were members of the police battalions involved in shooting, they were involved in transporting Jews to the death camps. And there were multiple units in Lublin alone, which is where we're going to talk about our next examples. There were two types of orders. One was to transport the Jews to the trains, and if they tried to get away or if they had any resistance of any sort, they could shoot to kill. Or there was an order that was directly called the Schießbefehl, which is literally translates as the shoot to kill order. So this order was to kill all Jews that were found outside of ghettos or anywhere they were supposed to be. Okay, so this order basically classified all Jews as outlaws merely for not being where they were supposed to be. Okay? And these units were supposed to keep weekly and monthly reports as to how many people they killed and etc. The numbers of Jews and non-Jews were kept separately. Okay? So if it was the same kind of thing, if it was the same order, if it was for the same reason, there'd be no logical reason to separate them. Okay? But they are separated, which clearly delineates that there was a difference between the shooting of Jews and the shooting of non-Jews. Okay? Again, these reports used camouflage language, which the Germans are really, the famous thing, the final solution. Usually these reports would refer to killings as Jews being dealt with according to orders. Okay? So that makes it difficult to discern whether the Jews were killed by shooting or by being taken to the death camps. But really it doesn't matter. When you think about it, there's no distinction between the police members' responsibility for taking them to death camps or actually shooting them. There's no difference. You're going to see.
Like second-degree murder.
You're going to see in a second. I actually think if you deliver somebody to somebody you know that's going to kill them, you can be indicted for first-degree murder also. You ever heard of Ray Caruth?
Well, what's the face of the couple?
Thanks for narrowing that down for us. He's a former wide receiver for the Carolina Panthers. He ordered a hit on his pregnant girlfriend, and now he's serving life in prison.
Good call.
And what's the guy that's...
Because conspiracy to commit murder is considered first-degree murder.
Yes, it just doesn't have love.
Charles Manson never actually killed the people that he's... What?
Great.
So you're saying that he shouldn't be?
Yeah,
Well,
the right age.
Unfortunately,
The right age, though.
the law disagrees with you.
No, Jews don't believe in prison. Jews do not believe in prison.
We don't.
Yo, Bobby, write it. We consider write it.
They probably all would be considered that. But I guess you're right. Halachically, for those specific murders where they just delivered them to the death camp, they would not be culpable from a halachic point of view. I'm sure there are other things, but purely considering that. Either way, according to most law at this point in time, other than halacha, you are culpable. And if you're not legally culpable, you're definitely morally culpable, I would say, for that. So I was mentioning weekly reports for these police units. The weekly reports for Police Battalion 133 Company A still survive. From July 25th to December 12th, this company, which is only it's 100 or so people, killed 780 Jews. Okay? Just by search and destroy missions. Okay? So by going out and hunting for Jews, they killed 780 Jews. That averages out to 6 Jews a person. From November 1st to December 11th, they killed 480 Jews, which amounts to 11 per day. Okay? This isn't the shootings that they did in terms of en masse shootings. These are Jews that they found, that they went out and found on their own. Okay? These were voluntary missions, as we've talked about. Again, Jews were listed separately from thieves, asocials, bandits. The reasons for killing them were given such as that they were work shirkers, that they were epidemic threats, or was without armband, which seems like a very legitimate reason to kill somebody, hidden after deportation, and sometimes no reason given at all. Thanks for your attention. Whatever. What? He's not going to post it anyway. Police Battalion 65. Okay, so this is one that's slightly more in depth. What are you, a mime? Anyway. So we'll follow them for the rest of the class. Next week I was going to talk about Police Battalion 101. We'll see. Police Battalion 65. They originally started killing upon entering the Soviet Union in 1941. Then, in January 1942, they actually fought with the army in northern Russia, which is something that most police battalions didn't do. If you want to go, just go. I can barely hear myself.
Me too. I can speak louder.
Anyway, in June, this police battalion was moved to Krakow. They were allowed to visit home. They went on a ski trip together to southern Poland as a unit. And from then until May 1943, they were employed in sending Jews to the death camps. And I'm going to read you a quote now from one of the guys that was part of this. So the main job was to locate Jews and bring them to the freight depots or train stations, and 30 or so would actually accompany the train to the death camp to make sure nobody got away. So here's what one of the members had to say. We had to report to the ghetto and take control of a column of Jewish people. We had to accompany these people to waiting freight cars, in which a multitude of people could already be found. These Jews were crammed in the most inhumane manner into the available cars. The SS took charge at the final destination. The train stopped by a fence, and with a locomotive, the SS guided the train inside. This is actually, he says in there he's not sure of whether it was Belzec or Auschwitz, but this actually corresponds more to Belzec than Auschwitz in terms of the train being picked up and guided in. In the area, we noticed a distinct smell of corpses. We could imagine what these people had to look forward to. Above all, it was an extermination camp for Jews. We had been told, oh well, actually that's a different one. We had been told that this is an extermination camp. Previously, we had been told that these people were being resettled. I mixed up two quotes there. I'm going to get to in a second. There's a guy who was part of the police unit who took them there. Okay? So, remember, these guys had already been killing Jews in Russia for over 2 years, right? So, well, they were bringing Jews to a place that smelled of corpses. They could put 2 and 2 together. That was going on was that they were killing them. So even despite the fact that Belzec, Sobibor, and Treblinka were actually not very large in terms of manpower, even though they cycled people in and out, much more people knew. Excuse me?
Who are the worst ones? Those 3 you mentioned?
I mean, Auschwitz was very bad also. I mean, hundreds of, in terms of survivors, yes. Yeah. Because Auschwitz actually had, well, they had work camps, right? So you could actually have a chance to survive them, right? These places didn't. If they kept you as part of the Special Commando, or to sort stuff, or to be a barber, and they didn't really keep you for very long. I was going to talk about it. People committed suicide there all the time, right? So even if they did live, they didn't often keep the will to live very long. So these police members that had taken the train to Belzec, they rested before they went back. And again, so they had time to think about what they had just seen. So try and think about what their emotions were, right? Were their emotions of horror? How did they feel when they smelled corpses? Yeah, thing is that they kept on doing it, right? So what was their train of thought? Well, as we've talked about, I've been trying to show that they did.
You're that guy, what are you going to do? You're going to be this question. They're not going to kill you for meeting?
No, so that's the thing we're going to talk about next week, specifically with Police Battalion 101. Goldhagen goes through that. There was even a specific person in that unit that everybody knew didn't want to kill people, and didn't. And you could transfer out without any punishment. Yeah. I'll try and prove it more concretely with actual names and things of that nature. But he does go through that you could actually, and again, right, the squads were composed of volunteers. If you didn't want to kill them, you didn't have to, right? You could just not go. Again, searching for individual Jews, you didn't need to find them, right? He has a good quote. Basically, if you don't want to find a needle in a haystack, you just don't, right? If you're going searching for Jews and you really don't want to, even if you're forced, right? He says, Goldhagen, I think he proves rather conclusively, they weren't forced to kill Jews. But if you say that they were forced to kill Jews in those situations, what about all the other situations where they actively searched for Jews and killed them? Right? Basically, he answers every argument, right? Oh, they were forced to do this. But there's no way that they were forced to hunt for Jews.
But if you never found it, if they were never ordered to hunt for Jews?
No. And even if they were, if you hunt independently, you don't have to find anybody. Yeah, they went off independently. Or they go off in very small units. And you can go off by yourself in that small unit. There were opportunities for people to not kill, is basically what the point is. And the point is that time and time again you saw they killed anyway. What he says about the death marches also right? The death marches. If you don't want to kill people, you know you're going to lose. You know that the hierarchy is not going to find you, not going to kill you. You don't have to kill them anymore. You can just leave. But again and again and again, they didn't. So obviously, the conclusion to make is that they weren't forced, basically. Also, the cruelty, okay? Even if you're forced to kill Jews, how you kill them, right, how they killed them would be indicative of how they looked at them. If they didn't want to kill them and they were being forced to do it, you can make it as short and quick and as painless as you possibly can. Okay? That doesn't explain, there was a story I left out. They made a Jewish man dance with a teddy bear while they beat him, and then they shot him. If you're being forced to kill him, you don't want to kill him, just kill him. Or if somebody's watching, hit him once, he'll go down, and then shoot him. So again and again and again, by various means, I believe that in his book, Goldhagen really shows that these people actually actively killed. And that they knew, and that a lot of people knew, and that they discussed it, and that they discussed it approvingly. So let me just tell you the quote. To say even if they smell the corpses, maybe it's just people, they don't bury people that die before they send them somewhere else. So this is another reservist. This is what he said. He said, "It stank terribly all around. When we took a rest in a restaurant nearby, a drunken SS man came by and told us that the Jews had to undress, and they were then told they were going for a delousing. In reality, one was in fact gassing these people and later burning them. If they didn't go along, they were driven continuously by whips. From that moment on, I knew that the extermination camps for Jews existed." And the actual quote says, "for Jews." That the member of the unit said, "extermination camp for Jews." Yes, he called it Judenvernichtungslager, which means Jewish extermination camp. So, again, it wasn't hidden in a way that nobody knew, because they were talking about it in a restaurant, right? This is not something that's hyper secret that nobody knows about. And again, very important, referred to as Jewish, despite the fact that non-Jews were killed as well, which Goldhagen obviously points out is the acknowledgement that if they weren't killing Jews, these things wouldn't really exist. And their predominant use was to kill Jews. Right? The Action Reinhardt camps, it was really only Jews. Auschwitz wasn't really like that. But again, predominantly, in numbers that really they're not even comparable. These were predominantly camps for the Jews. And just to show you that it wasn't really how skewed that the world they were in is that notification of killing assignments were often just simply posted in their living quarters. It wasn't hush-hush, it was kind of like put on a bulletin board. So...
In the SS?
No, in the police. The police. Yeah, his point is that the ordered police aren't indoctrinated, right? So the point is that they weren't indoctrinated. One, because they were older. They were old enough to have lived in a time where other political forces existed and not Nazism. So you can't just say, oh, they were brainwashed by it, right? He goes on to prove that their indoctrination was bad, so even if they had been able to be indoctrinated, it wouldn't have worked. Okay? He goes on to show that they had autonomy. Again, that they could have been composed of volunteers, and that they did it anyway. Right? So the main point is that each one of these people again, so there are exceptions, but the exceptions are more glaring because there were so few of them. But again, the point is that they were willing. They actually were Hitler's willing executioners. They were doing it on their own, of their own volition. Again, we sort of talked about what he says is the cause of it. That part is very controversial. A lot of people don't agree. But I think his main point is that the world really seeks to, or most mainstream historians seek to provide a way out for the people that did the actual killing, and you think that the only people actually responsible for anything were Hitler, Himmler, Mengele. But again, it's all these people with no name, all these people that got no trial, that got away with it. They did it also, and they did it willingly, and that's the whole point of this. And hopefully, I hope next week we'll talk about even more specific killing action by Police Battalion 101, and then hopefully after that we can move on to the action by camps. And yeah, that's all I have for this week. So thank you all for listening.